Hello, everyone. This is Jennifer Holcombe at MGI Research Monetize Forum 2021. Our next session focuses on best practices in managing customer references. To help us spotlight this topic, we've invited Jason Grant, who is one of the founders and president of MGI Verified, a company recently spun off from MGI Research. Prior to co-founding MGI Verified, Jason developed an impressive track record of success as Chief Technology Officer and Senior Product Management Executive at companies such as Monexa, NetSuite, and Oracle, among others. Jason, welcome to Monetize Forum 2021. We are delighted to have you participate in the conference.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, first off, what does Verified do?
Well, Jen, MGI Verified transforms the way companies manage the customer reference process. In my experience as a software company executive, I've seen a lot of situations where the sales process grinds to a halt or even evaporates at the point where a prospect actually asks to do a reference check. It's fair to say in today's environment that no meaningful B2B enterprise transaction will be completed unless a prospect can hear from a seller's references. It's a necessity, but often the prospects and the salespeople, they're slow to act on it, and it takes weeks for these reference calls to take place. It results in more delays in the sales cycle, and often it also results in the seller having to provide concessions to the people who are providing the references. All of this, of course, is accompanied by a lot of manual effort, a lot of scheduling to get people on the phone at the same time. If you think about it, organizations spend millions of dollars in automating their sales process, but this process is still largely manual. Even if an organization has a customer advocacy group, they're still dealing with it in a very manual process. At most, we find that organizations will develop some lists of prospects. They know who they can call when the request comes in, but essentially they're trying to mechanize a broken process, one that's not able to scale. From the start, MGI Verified went to automate this, make it frictionless, and provide a lot more value to the prospects when they request a reference from one of their sellers.
That sounds interesting. So why is this such a serious issue for sales organizations?
Well, the status quo actually affects everybody in the marketplace. Definitely the sales organizations you're asking about, but also it affects the prospects and the people willing to provide the references. The sellers spend a lot of time trying to link up their prospects with the references, even if there's a dedicated customer advocacy group. And the time is not really spent productively. If you multiply this by the number of prospects, by the number of references, by the number of salespeople, you can imagine the overall impact this has on the sales productivity. And ultimately, it's not just the time that's lost in the prospect. Current processes give their prospects the wrong impression about your company completely, at least they possibly can. More and more prospects are looking to accelerate their product evaluations, and they want to see these references much earlier in the purchasing cycle. Salespeople, on the other hand, of course, they're completely reluctant to give out their references. Their references are precious resources, and they don't want them to get burned out. So they usually only insist on giving them out when the deal's almost fully baked. This reluctance, obviously, to the prospect makes them think that the seller's not confident in the references, or maybe they just don't have a large enough volume. And they may even infer that the company is a little bit difficult to work with. This really deprives the sales team of one of their best sales tools, which is letting customers tell their stories. And of course, this is slowing everything down. And as we know, time kills deals.
Right. Sales organizations generally want to make the sales process as smooth as possible for their prospects to put their best foot forward. What have you seen in practice?
Prospects getting frustrated. So they'll wait weeks, several weeks for a 20 to 30-minute phone call. And oftentimes, that call needs to be synchronized with a large group of people. Inside the prospect organization, all the stakeholders, they want to be involved. They want to hear directly from the reference. They want to be able to ask their questions. But getting all these people together, it just delays the process more and more. And when the calls finally do take place, most organizations, they're not equipped to conduct a sophisticated, professional, and structured reference. They ask a few questions. Some of them are good. Some of them are not so critical. They kind of get a general sense. And then for the people who couldn't make the call, they verbally communicate this back to the larger team. Very few companies have a consistent approach conducting these reference calls, and they have even fewer have a consistent way of doing an apples to apples comparison and then sharing the results more enterprise-wide. The analysts at MGI Research, which is of course the parent company of Verified, in their advisory practice, they've conducted references for hundreds, if not thousands, of companies. And during this time, they have developed a very sophisticated process to conduct these reference checks. Even the best run organizations, they just don't have the process or sophistication to complete this level of a reference check. And that can lead to a mistake in product acquisition, and that translates into, for the prospect, lost time, lost revenue, and not to mention any reputation damage that could happen for their subsequent customers. On average, a product evaluation has about 2 to 3 references, and they ask about 5 to 15 questions. If you multiply that out, that's a lot of data to consolidate and to normalize. And comparing the feedback is difficult, especially without a standard methodology. And there's always the lingering question, is this reference providing an authentic account of their experience with the vendor? Or are they really participating because they're looking to seek some benefit from their vendor, perhaps a further discount or what have you?
And reference providers, what is their role in this process?
You know, in a new relationship, customers are often very enthusiastic to be a reference for their new vendor. They see it as a way to exchange value, be that future discounts or other benefits, you know, preferential treatment on their support cases. But as the vendor starts to scale and they call on that reference, a lot of times, a lot of that appeal is lost. Basically, they get burnt out. We call this reference fatigue. When the prospect and the reference finally talk, as I said, the call fails to meet expectations, but not only for the prospect, also for the reference. The reference is often not prepared for the questions that the prospect's going to ask. We see mismatches where there's just, you know, kind of funny mismatches. You have a CFO is connected with a sysadmin, and they're just speaking different languages, and the reference call is not productive for either of them. And in some cases, just human nature, the person providing the reference call is having a bad day. And so this transforms what could have been one of the best sales tools, which is the customers telling your story, into something that's adding a lot of uncertainty and doubt into the process. Oftentimes, the references will go back to the supplier. They'll ask for more references, and they'll ask for a better reference call. On the flip side, the references go back to the supplier. They ask for more discounts, more support. And if that supplier begins to lag in any tiny way with the person willing to provide the reference, that reference will just not return calls, and that will slow down the sales process even further. We've often seen that if somebody willing to provide a reference is in negotiations with their supplier for any contract, the account exec responsible for that particular account is not even willing to engage them as a reference for a different prospect. It's our belief that managing references in the B2B space in the way it's done now, the status quo, is not scalable. Whether you're a large organization looking to scale rapidly, or you're a high growth startup looking to establish credibility, the process is just broken.
So when you talk about reference management, it sounds like you speak from personal experience. Is there a backstory here?
There is. I was the CTO of a small cloud billing company called Monexa. We were under 60 people. As a relatively small organization, you know, we struggled with this reference check process. We weren't a volume play. We very much sought high quality customers. We weren't looking for quantity, and we were very fortunate to secure them. We had great customers such as Cisco, Best Buy, and OpenTable. It really was quality over quantity. But each of those deals relied very heavily on the reference check process. And it ended up becoming a chicken and egg thing for us as we scaled. We needed references to sell, but we needed to sell to get references. As a startup, our team was nimble, it was very competent, and you know, we were very much in control of the sales process. right up to that point where the prospect asked for the references. Suddenly we were reliant on a third party. We were reliant on their availability, their calendar. It really slowed down the sales process and hence our revenue. Often our revenue would get delayed to the next quarter. If we'd had a better tool and a better process on this side, we really would have been able to be a much larger company.
So is this issue confined to smaller, newer companies only, or is it something that affects large firms as well?
Let me give you an example. It's a great question. So at Monexa, less than 60 people, and we were very fortunate that we were acquired by a much larger organization, NetSuite. And I clearly remember thinking, we're going from this small 60-person company to something that has over 4,000 people at the time. This is pre-Oracle. And I was just thought about all the problems that are going to go away. They're going to have a lot of great processes. It's going to be much easier to get things done. We'll be able to move faster. It's going to be great. And there was no question. Once we got into NetSuite, the company was more mature. It was more organized. But truth be told, when it came to this reference check process, things were largely the same as they were in the smaller firm. The problem was bigger. It faced, we had more sales every quarter. We had a lot more salespeople. There was a lot more coordination that had to go on. And there was a lot more pressure being a public organization to hit quarterly revenue numbers. So, but it was still largely a very manual process to work through. Moreover, in the larger organizations, I'd spoken about reference fatigue earlier. As that organization scales, that becomes more and more prominent. The references just get worn out. So over time, I've personally noticed and seen in different sides of firms that this problem really does slow down the sales process and slows down the revenue. I knew many of the senior advisors at MGI Research, of course, from my time at Monexa and at my time at NetSuite. And when they talked to me about the concept of Verified, I immediately understood what they were talking about. I could relate directly to the problem. I knew exactly what they were describing.
How does Verified address this issue of reference management?
Without going into the sausage making of how we actually do it, let me talk to you about the benefits. So I'm going to talk to you about 4 benefits. So the first is we provide third-party validation. So we obviously have independent analysis who are very familiar with the industry. They've conducted hundreds, if not thousands, of these reference checks before, and they have a sophisticated process that's in-depth and comprehensive whenever they do one of these. The process can flag any inconsistencies we see across the reference pool. And having that reference validated by a third party brings a lot of credibility to the seller when they give it to their prospects, and actually helps the prospects build a better business case internally for their vendor. The second thing that really comes out is the breadth and depth of information that's actually conducted in the interview itself. Because of the experience and because of the structured process that we have in place to actually conduct these interviews, we know that there's a lot of things that need to be covered. You need to talk about product fit, all the way from product fit to customer support to contract and how that process was. We spend a lot of time covering those general things, as well as get specific to the market and the specific concerns that we know that a prospect and a reference will want to cover. These in-depth interviews exceed by far the scope and depth that any organization will conduct by themselves. And of course, because it's structured, they can compare the results. Third, we eliminate a lot of the friction in the process. Because the reference is recorded, stored on our cloud platform, and we can make it immediately available, it's just a lot faster. It allows the seller to provide the references much earlier in the sales process, and in a way that's actually a lot more sophisticated and in line with generally a much more sophisticated sales process. We make sure that those recordings are stored securely. We allow access for a very dedicated amount of time so that everybody can be sure the content is not being shared too widely. Fourthly, we help the references, the people willing to provide the references themselves. Once they speak to one of our analysts, they realize they're participating in a very professional reference check, and they know that from the security of the platform, they will make sure that their content is not shared with anybody that don't wish it to be shared with, which is obviously a big advantage for them. They don't get burned out. They can do a much more comprehensive check, and they know that they're helping their vendor.
Well, it sounds like Verified can be an important tool for sales and customer advocacy teams. Do you expect Verified to eventually replace the direct human-to-human reference conversation?
Frankly, we don't expect it to replace the entire process. It'd be a bit of a naive fantasy, but great if it did. For very large transactions, especially different geographical tendencies, there's always going to be prospects that want to have a person-to-person contact. Rather, we expect that maybe 60 to 75% of the requested references can be covered by Verified. That's obviously, that 60 to 75% is going to dramatically boost the efficiency, the speed, and the execution of the reference check process. For example, if a customer wants to do 3 references and the evaluation process, they might do 2 by Verified and 1 in person. Our early experience teaches us that when that third in-person reference check is actually done, the quality is much, much higher because the prospect has the background from the other references they've already received from the Verified platform. And of course, you're reserving your quality references to, much fewer asks of them to participate in reference checks. So they're more willing to participate, and they know the prospect's going to walk in the door with some good questions that's actually worth spending some time to talk about.
I imagine so. Well, that's about all the time that we have. So what final thought would you like to leave the audience with?
Sure. So see, most B2B transactions these days require a credible reference check. The current manual process is broken and it's not very scalable. It's standing in the way of organizations actually scaling. Verified's redesigning this process. We're automating the workflow and obviously providing global access to intelligent references for their prospects. A lot of benefits that Verified's providing. It's a third-party evaluation. It's not an endorsement, but it's a third-party evaluation that brings a lot of confidence to the prospects. It's an in-depth, comprehensive interview, and the process is a lot less friction, has a lot less friction than the current broken process. Hopefully, I've given the audience some sense of what we do. Please stop by our booth and we can tell you more.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. I appreciated it.